is Iain Watt from Forum for the Future, and this is a short presentation summarising what we at Forum think comprises corporate climate leadership post-COP21. Among the many reasons why COP21 was important was the fact that 1.5 degrees snuck into the final text, with signatories committing to pursue efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. I'm not going to go into too much detail as to why we should strive to remain under 1.5 degrees, but it's essentially because if we cross that threshold, then projections of future climate become less certain, the chances of experiencing disruptive climate change starts to grow dramatically, and we have to start considering the possibility of substantive shifts in climate as well as increased deviations around the norm. All in all, if we can, then it's very much in our best interest not to cross this threshold. It means more uncertainty, and uncertainty is bad for business. The trouble is, we're now very, very close to crossing the 1.5 degree threshold. This chart, produced by Carbon Brief, but using data from the IPCC, illustrates this challenge quite clearly. We only have 5 years left at current emission levels if we want to have a 66% chance of staying within 1.5 degrees. This means a new reality for business. The future is now disruptive, no matter what. If we cross the 1.5 degree threshold, then the resulting geophysical change will put huge stress on the global economy. Alternatively, avoiding 1.5 degrees will require the rapid and complete transformation of the global energy, transportation and agricultural systems. Either way, climate change and/or the societal response to climate change is going to fundamentally change the context within which your company is operating. So here's what we think any company with an aspiration to be a leader in climate change now needs to do. Firstly, you need to better understand your company's exposure to climate risk. As alluded to in the previous slides, this is more complicated than just looking at the possible physical impacts of climate change. It also means thinking about how society might respond. It also means not just looking at the potential impacts on your assets and operations, but also potential impacts on your supply chains and markets, and on the wider infrastructure upon which your company depends. We've developed this diagram to help our corporate partners think about climate risk. The wedges show the wide variety of risks that climate change poses. Alongside the physical impacts of climate change, companies also need to think through potential policy responses, NGO campaigns, investor pressure, legal risks and the like. And they need to be aware that the challenge of climate change is likely to inspire all sorts of technological and business model innovation. The circles in the diagram illustrate the fact that these risks don't just apply to corporate assets and operations. They also apply to your supply chains, to your markets, to the public infrastructure that your company relies on, and potentially even to the social cohesion of regions critical to your business. When thinking about climate risk in this sort of systemic fashion, it becomes clear that all companies face climate risk, regardless of sector. This is not just a discussion for the oil and gas majors or the electric utilities. There are significant implications here for all companies, especially if agriculture features somewhere in your supply chain. Moving forwards, we think that leadership will be defined not only by your efforts to tackle your emissions, but also by your efforts to protect your business against climate risk. Tackling emissions remains critical, however, but your targets and ambition now need to match the scale of the challenge. On the plus side, a 1.5 degree ambition now means that previously complicated discussions about science-based targets have become relatively simple. As we saw earlier, we only have 5 years left of emissions at current levels if we want a better than 2/3 chance of avoiding 1.5 degrees. So the science now pretty much calls for companies to commit to immediate and complete decarbonisation. And not just for their operations, but across their full value chain too. In terms of target setting, that means striving to be net positive or restorative over extremely tight timeframes. Now, I'm aware that the practical implications of this are beyond daunting, but if you want to be a leader, And if you want to protect your company against climate risk, then this is the reality we now face. Making progress towards such draconian targets requires a new approach, however, and we'll come back to that when we get to point 4. Thirdly, you have to ask yourself some fundamental questions about the products and services your company sells. Now, there is a huge opportunity agenda here. Do your products outperform the competition in terms of carbon? Do they enable your customers to reduce their emissions? Will they help society adapt? If they do, then demand for your products is likely to grow. But simply being better than the competition isn't sufficient if your company is producing something that's fundamentally problematic. So the really tricky question that has to be asked is whether your products are justifiable in a society that needs to decarbonise rapidly. Having an ultra-efficient supply chain won't cut it if your supply chain is producing something that's part of the problem. Finally, given the scale and urgency of the challenge, there is a clear need for collaboration and advocacy. If, as I suggested earlier, your climate targets now have to cover your full corporate value chain and require transformative action in a very short time frame, then collaboration on a scale never before seen is going to become essential. Companies can therefore no longer just focus on their bit of the puzzle, but must become effective advocates for broad societal action on climate change. And I'm defining advocacy broadly here. I don't just mean political lobbying, but also efforts to drive change through supply chains, to engage your peers, and to inspire your customers. And this, I think, also requires a shift away from a passive acceptance of the circumstances within which your company finds itself, to a proactive effort to change those very circumstances. In the past, you might have been able to argue that, well, we can't decarbonise until the government or the electric utility provides a carbon-free grid. Now, however, I think you need to be asking, what can you do to ensure that your grid decarbonises as soon as possible? So those are the 4 areas that we think will define corporate climate leadership moving forwards. Firstly, develop a full understanding of the risks and opportunities posed by climate change. Secondly, adopt net positive or restorative targets that cover the full corporate value chain. Thirdly, ensure that your products and our services are fit for purpose and best in class in a society aiming to stay below 1.5 degrees. And finally, undertake effective advocacy and collaboration. If you have any questions about that, or if you think we're missing something important, then please get in touch. Thanks very much.